We need to talk about the so-called religion of peace, Islam. I think we all know that the Islam that the media wants to get us to believe exists does not. There have been too many acts of terror to deny this. 9/11, the Bataclan, Manchester Arena bombing, the murder of Samuel Paty, a French school teacher beheaded for supposedly showing a depiction of Muhammad during a class in 2020. Last year, for example, an ISIS supporter stabbed 6 people in New Zealand before getting shot. 2019, Usman Khan indiscriminately stabbed members of the public on London Bridge. There are more cases than I can possibly list, and I encourage everyone to go out and actually look up just how many there have been. These attacks, of course, could have been prevented, but because of failures of our politicians, really, to properly control immigration, they weren't. And most politicians are cowards, I would say. They're unwilling to speak out against Islam for fear of being branded Islamophobic, for losing votes or potentially being harmed themselves. Well, I want better politicians. That's what I want, because this is something, people being killed is not something that you need to just overlook because it's an inconvenient truth. We need to talk about this. And one of these things is the fact that Muslims are immigrating to places like Britain, for example, in ridiculously large numbers. So you only need to visit London, Luton, Birmingham or Bradford, and you'll see that they've formed basically enclaves or ghettos or communities, whatever you want to call them, but they haven't really integrated very much. They haven't become westernized. In many cases, they've become more radicalized. And it is true that there are exceptions to the rule. I have met some myself where people have come from Islamic countries and truly integrated. However, it seems like this is too often not the case. And I would argue that one enforcer of Sharia law, one grooming gang member, one honour killer, or one terrorist is one too many. So let's take a real look at what Islamic values really are to see whether this is really consistent with what we value in the West. So this first story is from the Daily Mail, and it says, grinning Iranian husband carries the severed head of his 17-year-old wife through the streets after decapitating her in honour killing. Girl murdered after her father and brother dragged her back from Turkey where she'd fled. So the story goes on to say, an Iranian man this week carried the severed head of his wife through the streets after decapitating her in an honour killing after she tried to flee the country. An unnamed man beheaded his wife, Mona Hedari, 17, in the southwestern city of Avaz on Saturday before carrying a severed head around the streets. The young wife is understood to have fled to Turkey after her family discovered that she had an affair, but she was tracked to the country and brought back to Iran by her father and her husband this week, according to local media reports. The victim was just 12 when she was married to the man, who is also her cousin. This is
Jesus Christ.
What is wrong with these people? I'm sorry. How can people from these countries ever integrate with our society? You've got 12-year-olds marrying their cousins.
All they need is a couple of social justice seminars and they'll be model citizens, I'm sure.
But yeah, to make matters worse, they had a 3-year-old son when she was killed at the age of 17. And the authorities did end up arresting the husband and his brother on the charge of killing her in revenge for adultery. And the police haven't actually released their names. There is footage out there, which I'm definitely not going to show, showing the husband grinning as he held a knife in the one hand and carrying what was said to be his wife's decapitated head in another.
I mean, this is ISIS levels of psychopathy.
But he's not a militant.
No.
He's just an Iranian man. And it's not, of course, typical of everyone in Iran. I'm not going to say that because we have examples here of Iranians not appreciating this. So the Daily Mail article goes on to say, Iranian newspapers and social media saw an outpouring of shock and rage over the killing, with many demanding social and legal reforms. One quote is, a human being was decapitated, her head was displayed on the streets, and the killer was proud, said the reformist, I can't pronounce that name. How can we accept such a tragedy? We must act so that femicide does not happen again. lawyer Ali, I'm not going to be able to say his name, in the reformist paper, Shah,
Mojtahedzadeh.
there we go, blamed legal loopholes for paving the way for honour killings. At least there are some objections here, which is something, I suppose. However, there is still a sizable number of people in this culture carrying out these practices, and we don't know who these people are. We can't say, do you believe in honour killings at the border of our country, because they're not going to answer honestly, because they understand that we don't like that here. We're not going to be able to filter this out. So the problem is that we're having immigration from these countries in the first place. And this isn't made any better by articles, for example, the Huffington Post in the UK. Islamophobia plagues our education, politics and media. Why is nothing changing? I'll tell you why nothing's changing, because the problem's getting worse. That's why. The headline reminds me of a phrase, actually, that I've heard Sam Harris repeat a few times. The problem with Islamic fundamentalism are the fundamentals of Islam. The problem is Islam. It's not a few extremists that are misinterpreting it. It is the doctrine of Islam. That's categorically clear. For anyone who actually picks up the book, reads it, you can see.
It's quite an eye-opener.
So, and just to highlight the delusion of these people talking about Islamophobia, this is one of the cases that they suggest Islamophobia is rampant, okay? So in January 2021, a 4-year-old in the West Midlands was referred to prevent the government's controversial anti-terrorism scheme, controversial because it targets Muslims, funnily enough, who would have thought, over a game of Fortnite. The parents said the police turned up at their home at 10:30 at night. So isn't this like Gestapo-like behaviour, turning up at night to check the thinking of a 4-year-old child? Like, what's wrong with them? And then they're trying to use this as an example, like, oh, isn't it awful that even 4-year-olds are coming up with Islamophobic things? But no, actually it's awful that the police are coming to the home of children at night and telling them off for things that they've said while playing video games.
That's the society that we have to live in order to deal with Islamic terrorism?
Apparently so, according to them. It's absolutely ridiculous. And to add salt to the wound here, after listing all of these atrocious murders, beheadings, all of the other atrocities committed by Islam, they bring up this case. So in February, the first female Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, Zahra Mohammed, was subject to a hostile interview on the BBC and forced to negate the backwards sexist way of her religion. It's so
how
Islamophobic.
oppressive. We'll throw them in front of a camera so that they can broadcast to millions of people. What a horrible thing to do to someone. That's almost as bad as what? Beheading them?
Oh,
ridiculous. There's no equivalency between these things, but that's what they care about, because that's the thing that if they publicise it will weaken Britain and British civil society. Mad.
By March, 2 schools in Birmingham and Slough were being told to train Muslim students to effectively spy on one another, according to Prevent Watch, a community-led initiative that monitors the Prevent scheme. So, by the way, if you don't know, Birmingham is basically a British Mecca for Muslims, I suppose.
It is. There was a case of one of the oldest copies of the Quran was discovered in Birmingham a few years back.
For goodness sake. But yeah, this is just absurd because, of course, many extremists can be found in Birmingham. So the fact that they want people to basically rat out the extremists, I would say, well, good, isn't it? Surely. If they're going to carry out a terror attack, well, that's something I'm willing to put up with. I'm not all for the state interfering in people's lives.
Exactly, and that's the problem. Again, it's the question of, okay, this is the society we have to become in order to deal with Islamist terrorism. We have to train students to spy on each other? Really? What, are we the Soviet Union? Yes, I know some people might say, oh, it's only Muslim students, but no, if they're British students, we want them to be British students. So if we're then bringing in the state to, say, spy on each other, then that is a clear failure of multiculturalism. It's a disaster.
Let's go to one of the most egregious of all of the quotes here and the examples listed in this article. Later in the year, anti-Muslim hate showed its face again when MP David Amos's tragic killing on October led to death threats to British Somalis.
Yeah, so Islamist murders British MP, Muslims most affected.
Yeah,
literally that.
It's so depressing. Just seeing seeing our country just being bludgeoned by Islam, and then you're just like, yes, but you're the problem. You better remember it.
Right. It just reminds you of the old, I think it's a Greek saying, those who the gods would destroy, they first make mad. It just seems, anyway.
And it's not just in Britain that this is happening, of course. They're targeting France as well. So this is CNN. France is on a dangerous collision course with its Muslim population. And the article starts off saying, French lawmakers last month voted to ban women and girls from wearing hijabs while playing sports, showing the world once again that when it comes to further politicising, targeting and policing European Muslim women, our clothing choices and our bodies, France is in a league of its own. How about, CNN, you shut up for once? How about that, eh?
American media is one of the most toxic forces in the world.
Keep your nose out of European business. How about that? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Because you don't understand what it's done to Europe.
No, they've never understood foreign countries well enough to be able to make. Anyway.
But no, the funny thing is that they're talking about women and girls and defending their rights. Well, doesn't Islam kind of force them to wear these garments under punishment?
Yeah, under community pressure that is very difficult to distinguish from Sharia itself in Western countries, because they have their own courts, they have their own communities, they all talk to each other, and they enforce very strict moral standards on each other in these enclaves. And one of those moral standards is wearing face coverings, the hijab, or even better, the niqab. And so France is basically taking a step against this by saying, well, if it's legal, then this will be a segment of our population who are forced to wear this garment. And that's something that you would imagine Western feminists would be horrified at, but no, they just ignore it. And that's why the French call the problem Islamo-leftism. And this is a classic case of it. It's leftists complaining about Islamists.
It's obviously counter to French values of liberté, égalité, fraternité. I mean, especially the égalité part of it, right? Because that women are forced to wear a garment that men are not. So how you can argue that, I don't know. But nevertheless, the Daily Mail at least is pointing out some of the hypocrisy, which this next article is titled, France, it spits on my family. French Muslims fury as politicians focus on Islam, with one town described as Afghanistan 2 hours from Palace, after reporter writing about Sharia was forced to go into hiding. So well done to the journalist that wrote this. They're pointing out the hypocrisy of, oh, boo-hoo, oh, they're demonising us. Well, your own actions are demonising you, to be honest. I don't really understand
Behave like
what
demons
case you have.
Get demonised. I mean, beheading your child bride and grinning about it as you carry her head through the streets, that's pretty demonic in my book.
Yes. And it's been a problem for a long time, don't forget. It's not necessarily a recent problem. So cast your minds all the way back to 2009. This is a news story from the Lancashire Telegraph. Blackburn man encouraged Muslims to murder non-believers. I mean, this isn't new, is it? This is something that we should have solved by now, but we're still butting our heads against the same wall. And it's just ridiculous, isn't it? And I need to make any more examples, but here's another one. This one's relatively recent. Muslim man murders pregnant prostitute because she was working near a mosque. And Mariana Popper was 6 weeks pregnant when she was knifed by Farouk Shah. She was a Romanian trying to earn money to support her family. I mean, I don't support what she was doing. However, I certainly don't think she deserved to be killed. She had been in Britain for just 3 weeks before she was killed in Ilford, Essex. By, yes, very nice British name there, Farouk, isn't it? So this isn't even isolated to just
she'd
Europe.
been in Britain for 3 weeks, so this is... Oh, gosh. Wow.
Yeah. Clearly she didn't understand what she was getting herself in for, right?
But it sounds like, really, she comes to this country and within 3 weeks she's...
Been murdered by an Islamist, yeah.
Yes, but she's also working as a prostitute as well. So there's a lot of issues going on here, I feel. This is just one incident that scratches the surface of the degeneration of our towns.
And, I mean, needless to say, both parties in there It's a product of immigration.
And she
right?
was 6 weeks pregnant, so she immigrated when she was 3 weeks pregnant, and
I
then
know.
went into prostitution. What the?
I know. I didn't want to,
I know.
kick someone when they were down.
No,
but no,
of course
I
not. I'm not
certainly don't.
saying, like, goodness me, I'm not saying she should have been stabbed or anything. Absolutely not. But there's just so many things piling up into this story that it's hard to know where
It's
to
just
start.
horrific, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
This-
The whole, every angle you could look at it.
This is
it's
not the
terrible.
Britain for which we fought 2 world wars. I mean,
No.
to invoke the cliche. If you'd asked people 50, 60 years ago about this sort of thing, they would have laughed at you. They would have thought you were a dangerous lunatic or an extremist. And yet this is the world we're living in.
And it's not even isolated to Europe or isolated to people from Muslim countries. So this final story, it happened in Florida. A white ISIS enthusiast and Muslim convert, 21, is sentenced to life in prison for murdering boy, 13, and knifing 2 others at a birthday party sleepover in 2018 after the victims disrespected his faith.
What a brave man. Going off and killing children. But
So yeah, even lunatics in our own country are going to be taken in, or in your case in America, are going to be taken in by this disgusting ideology, this disgusting religion that is Islam. And we need to start pointing at it and calling it what it is, barbaric.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can support us at lotuseaters.com. You can subscribe and get access to all of our fascinating premium content that we can't really put in other places, such as this premium video about all of those things that Alex Jones got right. It wasn't a small list. And if you enjoyed that, you can always go on to Getter and follow @Callum and tell him what a good job he did putting all of this stuff together. Thanks very much.